My brother Daniel was explaining how he'd leveraged the foundry's debt into new CNC mills when I made the mistake of asking about our 6 months overdue client invoices. The table went quiet. My mother reached over and patted my hand. "Don't worry your creative head with these complex numbers, Alex," she said, her smile gentle and absolute. "Daniel has the business brain. We just want your life to be simple and happy." Simple. The word they'd used my whole life to justify every exclusion. Later, in the silence of my apartment, that word curdled into something else. A key. My father's printer login was still active on my laptop from when I'd fixed it last week. I remotely accessed his desktop. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just defying the simplicity. The folder was named Estate Simplicity Model. Inside, a PDF, the Miller Family Trust. I skimmed the dense legalese until one clause came into sharp, brutal focus. For the benefit of Alexander Miller, a monthly stipend of $2,500 shall be dispersed for their lifetime care. All assets placed under the trusteeship of Daniel Miller and Richard Miller, a lifetime allowance, controlled by my father and brother. They'd built me a financial cage and called it care. My hands were numb. I opened the second file, a cover email from our lawyer, Robert Sterling. If the rationale is Alexander's documented need for a stress-free, simplified lifestyle, it is defensible. Daniel approves. I had no documented need. I had a pottery business and a mortgage. All I had was their story about me. I clicked the third file, Advanced Schedule. It was a spreadsheet. Column A, dates going back 8 years. Column B, amounts, $45,000, $28,500, $62,000. Column C, purpose, house down payment, BMW X5 lease buyout, private school tuition. Column D, recipient. Every single entry said Daniel. The simplicity wasn't for my benefit. It was for theirs. A clean, quiet way to erase me. In the blue glow of the screen, something in me, the quiet, simple, grateful thing, finally broke, and something much colder began to form. I didn't sleep. The blue light from the spreadsheet seemed permanently etched behind my eyes. Each entry, house down payment, BMW X5, private school, was a landmine planted in the future I thought we shared. I saved every file to a secure drive. The shock was gone, replaced by a frigid clarity. I needed to understand the scale. The shareholder loans on the foundry's financials matched Daniel's advances. They weren't loans. They were early payouts of an inheritance he was stealing in real time. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Loved seeing you last night, sweetie. Don't be a stranger." XOXO. The disconnect was absolute. I didn't reply. Instead, I found Sarah Chen, an estate litigator. Her bio didn't talk about family harmony. It listed courtroom victories. A quote from her stood out. "Inheritance law isn't about sentiment. It's about property rights. Never confuse the two." I wrote a brief, factual email. No emotions. Just the facts. I had discovered a drafted trust that effectively disinherited me in favor of a sibling, with evidence of long-standing financial favoritism. I mentioned the potential for a partition action. I attached 2 redacted files, the first page of the trust and the advance schedule spreadsheet, with only the column headers and totals visible. I hit send. The reply came in less than an hour. It was just as brief. "Miss Chen has reviewed your inquiry. Can you come to our offices tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Please bring all the documentation you have." I spent the evening researching partition actions, forcing the sale of jointly owned property. It was a nuclear option for estranged business partners, not for sons and daughters. But that's what we were now. Partners in a family asset, where my share was being liquidated behind my back. My father called at 8 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. "Alex, your mother said you were quiet last night. Don't dwell on the business stuff, okay? It's not your world. Call me tomorrow." His voice was the same as ever. Patronizing. Final. The tone that had framed my entire life. It was the tone of a man who believed he'd already won. I played it once more, then deleted it. I looked around my apartment, at my shelves of finished mugs and bowls, at the sketches on my wall. This was the simple, happy life they'd wanted for me. It was a good life, but it was mine. And I suddenly understood with chilling clarity that they weren't trying to protect it. They were trying to own it. Sarah Chen's office was all sharp angles, glass, and silence. No warm wood or family photos. She was younger than I expected, with a gaze that felt like a physical scan. She reviewed the trust draft and the spreadsheet in under 10 minutes. The simplicity model isn't a care plan, she said, setting the printed trust draft aside after 5 minutes. It's a dispossession. The stipend is a clever insult. Just enough to look generous, pegged to an index that guarantees it will never build real equity. You'd be a pensioner in your own family. She looked up. Your goal? A fair share, not an allowance. Then we need to act before they sign this. We'll need everything. Did you find a signed copy? Any other documents? No signed copy? Just the draft folder. Look again. Hard. If there's a deeper reason for this exclusion, we need it. The law hates disparity without cause. That night, I remote accessed my father's desktop once more. The simplicity model folder was empty. He'd moved the files. Panic flickered, then died. He wasn't tech-savvy. I searched his drive for recent modifications. A file, modified the day after the dinner. Safe. Contents.pdf. I opened it. It was a scanned inventory for his home safe. Item 4. Original birth certificates. All. Item 5. Marriage cert. Item 7. Signed trust. The safe was in his study. The combination was my birthday. A sentimental gesture that now felt like a trap. I drove to my parents' house after midnight. Their bedroom light was off. I used my key, disabled the chime, and went to the study, the small wall safe behind his golf trophy. My hands were steady. 1029, my birthday. The lock clicked. Inside, passports, a stack of bonds, the thick, signed trust document. And beneath it, a long, sealed envelope. I opened it. My original birth certificate. Father, Samuel J. Carter. A name I'd never heard. My mother's name. Date, over a year before my parents' wedding. Beneath it, their marriage certificate. Date, 9 months after my birth. The world didn't spin. It snapped into a different, clearer shape. The story of my family was a lie. The favoritism wasn't just preference. It was a purification. I took photos with my phone. I put everything back exactly as it was. I locked the safe. In my car, I didn't cry. I just sat there in the dark, the phone's screen illuminating the proof. The simplicity they wanted for me was the silence of a secret. I was the complication they'd been hiding, and now they were finalizing the paperwork to make me disappear. Sarah Chen was right. We needed the deeper reason. I had just found it. I showed Sarah Chen the photos the next morning. This is the cause, she said flatly. This is the nuclear truth they built the simplicity narrative to contain. Legally, you're still Richard Miller's child, he's your presumptive father. But morally, in a court's view, this explains the structural exclusion. It gives us the why. She laid out the strategy. We file for partition of the 2 major assets, the foundry and the cabin. We attach the trust draft showing intent to disinherit. We will reference, but not yet file, the birth certificate. It's our shield. The moment they attack your character, we reveal it. It forces a settlement. Will it work? It turns a dry property dispute into a human drama of fraud and secrecy. Judges hate secrets. It also targets their lawyer, Robert Sterling. He likely knows. If he advised them based on this secret, it's malpractice. He'll fold and push them to settle. She drafted the complaint. The language was brutal in its clarity. It alleged systematic asset diversion to Daniel, constructive fraud via the drafted trust, and requested a court order to force an immediate, Market value sale of both properties with proceeds divided in specie. Once served, they have 30 days to respond, she said. They will call you. Say nothing. Let the law speak first. The papers were filed at 9 a.m. A process server was at Miller Foundry and Machine by 10:15. My phone lit up at 10:28. First my father, then Daniel, then my mother. 6 calls in 8 minutes. I silenced it. For the first time, the silence felt powerful. My father's voicemail was pure, sputtering rage. What is this garbage, Alex? A partition? Have you lost your mind? Call me now. Daniel's was colder, confused. Alex, what are you doing? This is insane. You're going to wreck everything. Call me. My mother's was tearful. Sweetie, please. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We need to talk as a family. I didn't call back. I texted all 3 the same message. All communication should go through my attorney, Sarah Chen. Her contact info is on the filed documents. The brick wall of that sentence felt better than I'd imagined. Sarah called me that afternoon. They've retained Robert Sterling, as expected. He's requested an urgent, informal conference tomorrow. He sounds nervous. The nuclear truth stays in the vault unless they attack your character. Understood? Understood. The conference was via Zoom. My father and Daniel were in Sterling's office. Their faces flushed on the screen. My father looked like I'd struck him. Daniel looked like he was solving an annoying math problem. Sterling looked like a man who'd just found a spider in his briefcase. Alex, this is extreme, Sterling began, forcing calm. A partition action will destroy value. The foundry can't be sold piecemeal. This is a family matter that should be discussed privately. Sarah spoke, her voice cool. The time for private discussion was before your client drafted a trust that converted my client into a permanent dependent. The partition is the remedy for irreconcilable ownership disagreement. We're prepared to see it through. My father leaned into the camera. Alex, this is absurd. You don't know what you're doing. You're being manipulated by this lawyer. My client is being manipulated by a decade of financial favoritism and a plan to disinherit them. Sarah replied. The advance schedule is particularly persuasive to a judge. Daniel's mask slipped. Those were loans, for the good of the business. The business financials show no repayment terms. They look like gifts. Or theft. Sterling paled. Let's not use inflammatory language. Perhaps we can discuss a buyout, a cash settlement to avoid litigation. We're past that, I said, speaking for the first time. All 3 faces snapped to me. The goal is equitable division, I said, echoing Sarah's words. Not a payoff to go away. My father's expression crumbled from anger into something worse. A dawning, terrified realization that I was not the person he thought I was. That his control was a fiction. Alex, please, he said, his voice cracking. Sterling cut in, placing a hand on my father's arm. Richard, let's take a break. We'll reconvene with a formal offer. The screen went black. Sarah turned to me. Sterling knows. He's not defending the case. He's managing a catastrophe. He'll push them to settle fast before we depose anyone and the secret comes out. What now? Now, she said. We wait for their offer. It will be low. And then we show them we're not bluffing. Sterling's formal offer arrived 2 days later. A single lump sum, $200,000. In exchange, I would renounce all claims to the foundry, the cabin, and any future estate. Sarah slid the letter across her desk. It's an insult. The cabin alone is appraised at over $400,000. They're treating you like a nuisance to be removed. What's the next move? We escalate. We file a motion for a preliminary injunction to freeze all foundry assets and for the appointment of a forensic accountant. Standard procedure in partition. But it's a public declaration of war. It also triggers discovery. We'll subpoena every bank statement, every loan document. She filed the motion. The response was immediate panic. Daniel called me directly. Bypassing Sarah, I answered on speakerphone in her office. "You have to stop this, Alex," he hissed, his voice stripped of all pretense. "You're going to bankrupt the company with legal fees. You have no idea how thin the margins are." "I've seen the financials, Daniel. I know about the margins. And the shareholder loans." A beat of stunned silence. That's business. It's my inheritance. You took it early. I'm just adjusting the ledger." He hung up. The injunction hearing was scheduled a week later. It was a procedural formality, but it was the first time we'd be in a courtroom. The night before, my mother showed up at my apartment. She looked frail, lost. "Can I come in?" she whispered. I let her. She didn't sit. "Your father, he's not well." "This stress, Alex. Why are you doing this?" "We're family." I looked at her, the keeper of the secret. "What's my father's name, Mom?" She froze. "What?" "On my birth certificate. What name is on it?" All the color drained from her face. She understood. The secret wasn't just found. It was now a weapon I held. "It doesn't matter," she breathed. "It mattered when you used it to make me the outsider. It mattered when you drafted the simplicity model for the child who complicated your story." Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't for me. They were for the shattered piece. "We were going to take care of you. You were going to make me disappear, just like you did with Samuel Carter." Hearing the name aloud made her flinch, as if struck. She had no more words. She turned and left. The quiet click of the door final. The line was drawn, not between family, but between truth and the lie we'd lived. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. All dark wood and stale air. My father and Daniel sat at the other table with Robert Sterling, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They didn't look at me. The judge, a weary woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the motion. "This is a partition. The purpose of an injunction is to preserve the asset pending sale. Mr. Sterling, does your client oppose the appointment of a neutral accountant to simply establish value?" Sterling stood. "Your Honor, the business is complex. An outside audit is disruptive. We believe the parties can reach a private settlement." "Given the allegations of asymmetric distributions," the judge said, glancing at the advance schedule attached to our filing, "disruption seems necessary." Motion granted. I'm appointing Charles Bannon as forensic accountant. All financial records are to be produced to him within 14 days. Further, all assets of Miller Foundry and Machine are frozen. No further draws, loans, or transfers without court approval. My father put his head in his hands. Daniel stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. As we left, Sterling hurried over. "Sarah, a word?" In private, they stepped aside. I watched Sterling talk rapidly, hands gesturing. Sarah listened, then shook her head once. Sterling's shoulders slumped. "He offered a slightly better number," Sarah told me in the elevator. I refused. "He then tried to feel me out about sensitive personal information that might come out in discovery." I told him all facts were relevant. He's terrified of the birth certificate becoming a public exhibit. The forensic accountant, Charles Bannon, was a blunt man in a rumpled suit. His subpoena power was immediate. Within days, the real state of the foundry was laid bare. The shareholder loans to Daniel and my father totaled over $800,000. The business had a line of credit against the property at 90% of its appraised value. The cabin was the only unencumbered asset. Bannon's preliminary report was a death certificate for my father's legacy. The foundry's equity was negligible. Daniel's advances had bled it dry. Daniel called me again, his voice ragged. "You win. Okay? You want the cabin? Take it. Just drop the partition. Let me keep the business." "The business is debt," I said. "It's my life." "And the cabin was supposed to be my simplicity," I said, and hung up. The call I didn't expect came from Robert Sterling himself, to my personal phone. "Alex," he said, his voice strained. "I am calling without your father's knowledge. I am resigning as their counsel. Conflict of interest. I should have, years ago, I am advising them to settle with you on whatever terms you will accept. The case is indefensible. For what it's worth, I am sorry. The third party had betrayed the villain. Not out of conscience, but out of self-preservation. The walls were closing in on them, and their own architect was fleeing the building. The mediation was mandatory, a last stop before a trial that would air everything in public. We met in a sterile conference room. My father and Daniel arrived without a lawyer. Sterling had officially withdrawn. They looked hollowed out. The mediator, a retired judge, had read Bannon's report. The numbers are what they are. The foundry's enterprise value post-debt is minimal. The cabin is the only liquid asset of significant worth. How do you want to proceed? My father spoke, his voice a broken thing. Alex, the business is my life's work. Please, I said nothing. Sarah spoke for me. Our proposal is straightforward. My client receives clear title to the Cedar Lake cabin, free of any liens. My client renounces all claims to Miller Foundry and Machine. The existing business debts and shareholder loans remain the responsibility of the business, and by extension, the remaining owners. A clean partition. It was the ultimate simplification. I walk away with the one thing of real value they hadn't managed to mortgage. They keep the hollowed-out shell. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. That's theft. The cabin is worth $500,000. The business is saddled with debt because of his spending. He pointed a shaking finger at my father. My father flinched as if whipped. You took the money too, Daniel. For your damn car, your house. You said it was an investment. You said the business could handle it. You said Alex would never know. The secret was out, but not the one I was holding. Their betrayal of each other was louder than any truth I could reveal. Their alliance, forged against me, had shattered under the weight of the debt they'd created. The mediator let the silence hang. The proposal is legally sound. It partitions the assets. Mr. Miller, he said to my father, you and your son Daniel would retain the business and its liabilities. Mr. Alex Miller would receive the cabin. Do you accept? My father looked at Daniel with a kind of horrified exhaustion. Daniel wouldn't meet his gaze, staring at the table, calculating his ruined future. We don't have a choice, Daniel muttered, the words a surrender. They signed the term sheet. The legal documents would take weeks, but the outcome was locked. I had won. Not by getting everything, but by forcing the truth of the ledger. They didn't lose because I took so much. They lost because they had so little left to give, and I took the last good piece. As we stood to leave, my father finally looked directly at me. The contempt was gone, replaced by a bewildered loss. Who are you? He asked. Not angrily, but like he truly didn't know. I didn't answer. I had nothing left to say to him. The callback line he deserved belonged to a ghost, Samuel Carter's son, and that ghost was finally walking away. The final settlement papers were signed in Sarah Chen's office. Our signatures were just forms. The battle was already over. Title to the Cedar Lake cabin was transferred solely to me. The quitclaim deed felt heavier than any sculpture I'd ever made. Miller Foundry and Machine and all its entangled debt now belonged solely to Daniel and my father. The shareholder loans remained on the books as their personal liability to the corporation. The bank, with the court order lifted, would soon come calling for the line of credit. That was no longer my complexity. My mother called once after the mediation. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, just a sigh and a soft, "I'm sorry, Alex." It sounded final, like she was apologizing for my existence. I deleted it. I went to the cabin the day the deed was recorded. It was early fall and the lake was a sheet of iron gray under a clear sky. The silence was complete, and for the first time, it was peaceful. Not simple, but mine. I changed the locks. I canceled the utilities and reopened them in my name. I stacked firewood I'd split myself years ago. The physical work was a kind of quiet reclamation. A week later, a text appeared from an unknown number. "Hi, Alex. My name is Martin. I was a good friend of your biological father, Samuel Carter. I heard about what happened with the Millers. Sam would have been proud of you for standing your ground. If you ever want to talk about him, I'd be happy to. I read it 3 times. I didn't feel a surge of emotion. No longing, no sudden belonging. Just a quiet recognition. A door to a past I never knew existed was now cracked open. On my terms. I didn't reply. Not yet. I drove back to the city. My pottery studio was as I'd left it. The projects waiting for me were my own. My savings were depleted from legal fees, but my mortgage was mine. My business was mine. The cabin, free and clear, was mine. The simplicity they'd designed for me was a cage of dependency. What I had now was simpler. It was all real, and it was all mine. I never heard from Daniel again. A Google alert I'd set up told me Miller Foundry and Machine filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. 6 months later, the business was too leveraged to survive the call of its own debts. The narrative of Daniel as the business brain ended with it. My father sold his large house, downsizing. The gossip in their circle was about the bitter family lawsuit, the shocking bankruptcy. The why remained a juicy mystery, but the birth certificate never went public. Sarah Chen had been right. The threat was enough. Their reputation was shattered by the financial collapse, not the secret. They lost status, money, control, and the narrative, exactly as required. I threw a bowl on the wheel that evening. The clay was cool and yielding in my hands. The hum of the wheel was the only sound. There was no grand victory, no miraculous new life. There was subtraction, the removal of a parasitic lying weight. The shape emerging from the clay wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was a new shape built from what was left after the fire. And that was enough.